This is Duke University.
Hi everybody, my name is Jessye Waxman. I'm a senior here at Duke University studying environmental science and policy with a focus on freshwater issues. Today, I'm here to talk to you about what hydraulic fracturing is doing for our economy at both a national and local scale. I want to start by asking the following question. What is fracking doing for our national economy? I'm going to tell you. Hydraulic fracturing is a job creator. A recent study commissioned by the United States Chamber of Commerce reported that hydraulic fracturing has already created 1.7 million jobs and is expected to create another 1.8 million in the next 20 years. Impressed? Perhaps you should be. 1,700,000 jobs is a lot of jobs. In fact, it's enough jobs to employ the entire state of Idaho. Unfortunately, this number is a little misleading. This number includes jobs in a variety of industries. There are jobs in the fracking industry, for drilling, for excavating, geological surveyors, legal services, so on. There are jobs created in industries that support hydraulic fracturing, for example, manufacturing companies that produce pipes for wells. And there are jobs created in small communities that result directly from increased local spending. This number also includes 3 types of jobs: full-time, part-time, and part-year. And this last one's really important to note because many of the jobs in the hydraulic fracturing industry only last about 3 weeks in length, so temporary jobs. So really, a more accurate statistic would be that hydraulic fracturing has created 1.7 million full and part-time jobs. I want to break this down a little further. Hydraulic fracturing is broken into 3 stages: drilling and well construction, the actual process of fracking itself, and natural gas extraction, or energy production. And as you can clearly see here, energy production constitutes the majority of the life cycle of a well. Conversely, the drilling and well construction phase only lasts 50 to 100 days on average for a single wells. Ironically, this is where up to 51% of jobs in the industry are. The drilling phase employs 98% of the workforce that works at a well. And that remaining 2%, well, it only comprises 5% of the total industry jobs. So not that many. Let's break this down another way. Every 100 wells in production creates 41,000 temporary jobs, but only 17 full-time, full-year jobs. So more wells does mean more jobs, and more permanent jobs. And that's a good thing for a national economy, just maybe not as good as this number might suggest. I now want to look a little more locally. What happens when hydraulic fracturing is introduced to local economies? Here, the issue is far less clear-cut. What we tend to see is that in small communities, hydraulic fracturing flourishes, but often at the expense of other industries. So let's start from the beginning. The development phase of fracking isn't limited just to the drilling and construction of wells. It also includes the preparation of an area to accommodate an extractive industry. Oftentimes, what this means is really just building a lot of roads that can support heavy traffic, but on a county-level scale, this development phase can last for several years. This development phase, as I said before, is also very labor-intensive. Low-skill jobs like trucking, excavating, and heavy equipment operators can be contracted locally. But the development phase also requires geologists, engineers, inspectors, cartologists, specialists that the industry needs to bring in to work on a project for a few years at a time. So in Pennsylvania, for example, the industry has relied largely on out-of-town workers. So what we do see is some local job creation, but we see more jobs going to out-of-town workers. So what are the consequences of this? what we see is that with the creation of wells comes an influx, a large influx, of non-local workers, temporary residents who require both long and short-term housing. And by simple supply and demand economics, an increased demand for houses raises the price of houses. And this isn't too much of a problem if you're an industry worker, because industry workers tend to have among the highest paying jobs in small communities. But this does create a sort of localized housing crisis that's problematic not only for local residents, but for some local industries as well. In Colorado, for example, retirees can no longer afford to buy homes in those areas, and the prospect of developing certain areas as retirement communities has decreased. Resort towns are at risk of losing employees who can no longer afford to pay their housing rents, and school districts are experiencing teacher shortages because teachers are taking jobs in communities where housing is more affordable on a teacher's salary. What's more is that higher industry pay is drawing people away from other businesses. So we see local businesses and local governments having trouble finding local employees to fill their positions. While some local businesses are trying to increase their wages in order to repopulate their staff, we don't see that all that often. Rather, what we see is a lot of empty jobs that nobody wants to fill, and communities that are left without a workforce. If this weren't problematic enough, the very same public services that are becoming increasingly understaffed, the police department, the fire department, hospitals, public schools, local governments, are becoming increasingly overburdened trying to meet the demands of an increasing population. So this is where taxes come in. Many states collect something called a severance tax. It's a tax associated with the extraction of a non-renewable resource. And these taxes are meant to help local communities adapt to the changes that come from the involvement of an extractive industry. Depending on where you live, different states distribute these funds differently. But regardless of what state you're in, there's consistently a problem. In community after community, local governments do not have sufficient funding to meet the demands of an extractive industry. And this creates problems that can be as small as inability to maintain local roadways to as big as making long-term decisions that negatively impact the ability of these communities to maintain a healthy and diverse local economy into the future. So, on a national scale, hydraulic fracturing looks pretty great. It's not only creating American energy, it's creating American jobs. American jobs. But we can't ignore what's happening close to home. If other extractive industries have taught us anything, it's the following. Pace matters. A slower development phase gives communities time to adapt to the changes from an extractive industry. Involve industry. Have local governments partner with industry to help fund local services and infrastructure, and involve local governments in the permitting process for wells so that communities can decide whether they're capable of handling the impacts of drilling. If hydraulic fracturing is inevitable, and that's a big if, we need to do what we can to protect these communities and their environment. Thank you.